They fined me $8,000 for doing exactly what they told me to do. I used to believe something very simple. If you follow the rules, you'll be fine. If the HOA tells you to fix something, you fix it. Problem solved. That's how I thought the world worked. But one letter from my HOA proved me wrong, because somehow I followed their order exactly, spent my own money fixing the problem, and 3 days later, they fined me $8,000. And when I asked why, their answer made absolutely no sense. But it gets worse, because the more I dug into it, the more I realized something disturbing. The HOA had created a situation where no matter what I did, I would lose, unless I figured out what they were really doing. And trust me, what happened next shocked everyone. It started on an ordinary afternoon. I had just pulled into my driveway after work when I noticed something sticking out of my mailbox. A certified letter. Now, if you live in an HOA neighborhood, you know exactly what that means. Certified mail from the HOA is never good news. Never. I stood there for a moment holding the envelope. For a second, I considered taking it inside and opening it later, but curiosity got the better of me. So I ripped it open right there in the driveway. And within seconds, my stomach dropped. The letter said the oak tree in my front yard had been declared a safety hazard. According to the HOA, the tree was dead, and because it leaned slightly toward the street, it posed a danger to pedestrians, drivers, and nearby homes. Then I saw the line that made my heart start racing. I had 14 days to remove the tree. 14. And if I didn't remove it within that time frame, the HOA would start issuing $200 fines every single day until it was gone. $200 a day. Think about that for a second. That's $1,400 a week, over $6,000 a month. So naturally, I did what most reasonable people would do. I decided to take care of the problem immediately. But I had no idea that decision was about to trigger the most ridiculous HOA nightmare of my life. Now, to be fair, the tree really was dead. I couldn't deny that. That oak tree had probably been standing in my yard for decades before I bought the house. But over the past year, something had clearly gone wrong. The leaves stopped coming back, branches dried up, and eventually the entire tree looked lifeless. At the time, I kept telling myself I'd deal with it eventually. But life gets busy. You put things off. Until one day the HOA shows up with a letter reminding you, and suddenly that tree becomes the most urgent problem in your life. But the more I looked at it after reading the letter, the more I realized they weren't completely wrong. If that tree fell during a storm, it could easily land in the street, or on someone's car, or worse, on someone walking down the sidewalk. And if that happened, everyone would blame me. So I decided to handle the problem immediately. What I didn't know was that the HOA had already set a trap, and I had just walked straight into it. 14 days sounds like plenty of time, until you try to schedule a professional tree removal. Then you realize something quickly. Tree companies are busy, really busy, especially when it involves large trees. And the oak in my yard was not small. The trunk alone was around 24 inches wide. That's a serious tree, the kind that requires a full crew and heavy equipment. So I started calling tree services immediately. And after several calls, I finally found one company willing to come out the next morning to inspect it. The guy showed up, walked around the tree, looked up at the branches, then nodded. "Yeah," he said, "this one's dead." Then he gave me the estimate, and honestly, it hurt. $1,200. Now, nobody likes spending $1,200 unexpectedly, but compared to $200 a day in fines, it actually seemed like the safer option. So I said yes. They scheduled the job for the following week. At that moment, I thought the situation was under control. I had no idea that decision would come back to haunt me. A few days later, the crew arrived. Big truck, chainsaws, climbing gear, the works. If you've never watched a large tree being removed, it's actually pretty impressive. One guy climbs the tree with ropes. Another cuts branches piece by piece. Each section gets lowered carefully to the ground. Then they start cutting the trunk into chunks. The entire process took most of the afternoon, but by the end of the day, the massive oak tree that had stood in my yard for decades was gone. Just like that. The crew cleaned everything up, loaded the wood, and drove away. And I remember standing there looking at the empty space where the tree used to be, feeling relieved. The hazard was gone. The HOA's problem was solved. And best of all, I had beaten their 14-day deadline easily. I thought the whole situation was finished, but 3 days later, another letter arrived. And that's when things got insane. When I saw the second certified envelope from the HOA, I assumed it was confirmation that the violation had been resolved. Maybe even a thank you. Instead, it was something else entirely. The letter said I owed the HOA $8,000. I stared at the number for a long time. $8,000 for removing the tree they told me to remove. At first I thought it had to be a mistake, but then I read the explanation. According to HOA Ordinance 14.2, any tree larger than 6 inches in diameter required a removal permit before it could be cut down. My tree was 24 inches, which meant I needed a permit, and because I didn't have one, the removal was considered unauthorized. Unauthorized tree removal carried a penalty of $8,000. That's when my confusion turned into anger, because something about this didn't add up, not even a little. And when I called the HOA office, things got even stranger. The woman who answered the phone sounded calm, like this situation was completely normal. I explained everything: the first letter, the deadline, the tree removal, the new fine. Her response? Well, sir, you were required to obtain a removal permit before cutting down the tree. I told her the original letter never mentioned a permit. She said the rule was in the HOA code, so I asked her one simple question. How long does the permit process take? Her answer made everything suddenly make sense. About 10 business days. And that's when the trap became obvious. The HOA gave me 14 days to remove the tree. The permit process takes 10 business days, which means by the time the permit was approved, I would have maybe 4 days left to hire a tree company. And that's assuming everything went perfectly, which it never does. So I asked her the question that changed everything. What exactly was I supposed to do? There was a long pause on the phone. Then she repeated the rule again. And that's when I realized something important. The HOA had created a situation where no matter what I did, I would lose, unless I challenged them. And that's exactly what I decided to do. HOAs usually have a process where you can dispute fines, so I requested a hearing. I gathered every document I had: the first letter, the fine notice, the receipt from the tree service, photos of the dead tree, everything. When the hearing started, the HOA representative, let's call her Miss Price, presented their argument. According to her, the rule was simple. Trees larger than 6 inches required a permit. No permit meant a violation. Violation meant fines. Case closed. But then it was my turn to speak, and that's when everything changed. I started by showing the original letter. You told me the tree was a safety hazard, I said. You gave me 14 days to remove it. Then I held up the second letter. And now you're fining me for removing it. Miss Price responded immediately. You were required to obtain a permit first. So I asked the same question again. How long does the permit process take? Approximately 10 business days. Then I did the math out loud. You gave me 14 days to remove the tree. The permit takes 10 days. That leaves 4 days to schedule a removal. And that's when the room went quiet, because everyone knew something didn't make sense. But what the hearing officer said next changed everything. After reviewing the documents, the hearing officer leaned back in his chair. Then he looked directly at the HOA representative and said something I'll never forget. This appears to be administrative entrapment. In other words, the HOA created conflicting rules. One rule demanded immediate action. Another rule required a slow approval process. And the homeowner had no clear way to comply with both. So the ruling was simple. The $8,000 fine was thrown out. But it didn't stop there. The HOA was ordered to reimburse the $1,200 I spent removing the tree. And on top of that, they had to pay me $2,000 for the trouble they caused. What did this whole experience teach me? Looking back, this entire situation could have been avoided with one simple sentence in the original letter. Apply for a permit before removing the tree. But they never said that. And that's why the whole thing collapsed once it was examined closely. Because rules are one thing, but communication matters just as much. And when authorities leave out important information, people get trapped. If you live in an HOA neighborhood, remember this. Never assume the letter tells you everything. Always verify. Call the office. Ask questions. Check the rule book. Document every conversation. Because if something goes wrong, those records might be the only thing protecting you. The tree is gone now, but the lesson remains. Because sometimes, doing exactly what you're told is the thing that gets you into trouble.